Oh, hi there, sorry. I'm just eating a pudding I've made in my reflector oven. Guess what this video's about? Reflector ovens, obviously. Now, I'd wanted to have one for quite a while, and I didn't know whether I could justify it, but I did take the plunge with some birthday or Christmas money or something, and I thought, to me, it just seems to be the sort of thing where you perhaps bake breads and things like that, but I thought I'd give it a chance to do other things, both on camp and at home with a fire pit. And at the beach, I'm going to do a very basic bannock cum scone. One additional thing I've added to my kit is 4 sturdy tent pegs, and what I do, I angle them in front of the reflector oven, and it means I can bank the embers up in front of it to add to the heat. It's also pretty good at keeping food warm at a distance. This is some twice cooked chips I've done that I'm just keeping warm until I've got the main meal cooked to go with them. So here, typically, I'm just getting the fire going in the morning, and that's 223 in there. Here's a nice easy one. This is a pear crumble. Basically it's a tin of pears in there and half a packet of crumble mix in there. Normally it'd take about 25 to 30 minutes, but this will be slightly less because it's sort of half measures. That's the pear crumble in situ. Right, it's had its cooking time, but I've got the pegs in and I've just angled it down onto the wood to put a bit of colour in its cheeks. And there we go, I've just put a few ash twigs on just to generate some flames to brown it. And obviously you can see I had to stay with it because there was a danger that the parchment paper would catch fire, and it did, so obviously that needed blowing out. That's pear crumble served with a generous dollop of cream. It's one of the easiest and most satisfying things you can do in the reflector oven for my money. Doing a sort of bannock cum scone in the reflector oven on the beach, but I've used a self-lighting charcoal bag. It's been a bit problematic in the wind that's been whistling down the cove, and I'm just a bit worried that the sea's actually going to beat me to it as it's coming in. And I'll be using kelp to pick the pot up, so I've forgotten to bring the pot tool. There we go, I've got the wind, and that's where the tide finally is. Next up, bannocks. I'm just doing the mix now. Very easy to do on the reflector oven. This is a favourite of mine. I'll do just about anything for roast Turkish delight. I've made this one up with milk as well, so it should be lush. I'm using the natural slope at the bottom of the reflector oven to be my advantage. What I've done, I've pinned it at the back with a peg so that it's even more angled towards the flames. And that's registered at about 170 at the moment. I've just flipped it over to give the bottom a bit of colour as well. There we go. That's puffed up lovely. It's like a scone almost, or a scone, whatever you want to call it. And the self-raising flour has really made that nice and light. And so with bannocks in mind, we're going to do a proper bread. This is about 150 grams worth of strong white flour, half a packet of yeast and some salt. And there we go, that's the bread in. Again, I've put the pegs in to jack up a little firewall for it. When you do a solo camp, using the Crusader cup is really handy to do smaller portions. The only thing is you have to put it on its side there unless you're going to brown something, and I'm just thinking about a mod for this. It's just whether I'm brave enough to do it. The bread's almost done. It's got a fairly decent colour coming on it, so what I've done, I've tipped it between the bars just to angle it towards the actual logs, and I put some quick burning twigs on just to give it a little bit of flame. Yeah, that'll do nicely. Perfectly done. Now I'm going to try something on the reflector oven I've not tried before. I'm going to put a little chicken meal in. It's going to be a small chicken breast, bacon, gnocchi, stock and some spinach. Now at home, a 180 oven, that would be about 30-35 minutes, so we'll see how we go. So first things first, I'm getting a fire going here and getting 2 large logs going so they become massive embers to put on the tent pegs in front of the chicken. Whoa, so it's been registering anywhere between 250 and 300 and plus. Now for that tricky halfway turn. I think. Still feels fairly sound. And the log should last hopefully until it's finished. I did have to add an extra log to the front. It did start to disintegrate. Yeah, it's not smoking. That's what temperature that is. Yeah, it's 48 degrees C, so it's not quite done. And I've really loaded that as well. Yeah, the gnocchi's done. Not surprised. Yeah, and the bacon's not as well. So that even with a lot of excess heat in there and the wind actually blowing in my favour, that's still not cooked after 35 minutes. So I'm pan frying that chicken just to finish it off. I think probably about, I don't know, 2/3 might have been done if I'm being generous, but it would have taken a lot longer than 35 minutes which I had it in. In there's a version of a clouty, which is basically alcohol laced fruit and flour. What else is in there? Baking powder, milk, butter, sugar and eggs. I think that's covered it all, and that'll be about 30 minutes. Let's have a look. A little bit squidgy still, but that's 45 minutes that instead of 30. Right, that's going to have some cream put on it and has but seconds to live. Embers are king when you're cooking on a campfire, but I do find with a lot of things that occasional wall of fire with some quick burning twigs will actually help the cooking process. All done for the evening, but I tend to leave the reflector fire up. I mean, I've no way of proving if it helps, but you know, if people put a row of logs up to reflect heat back, then I'm sure a fit for purpose oven will be no harm at all. And now to try something that's not actually in the manual. That last shot with the reflector oven was just a silly throwaway, but the idea is I've stripped everything off it, and what I'm going to do is going to use this modified kebab stick. Yes, it's upside down, because what I'm going to do is pile some chicken on there and try and use it like a tandoori oven. That piece of wood there is what the kebab stick's going to rest on to keep it clean, and we've got the 4 pegs there which are going to have the ashes banked up against them. So here you can see the arrangement. I'm just waiting for these sticks to take, and I've wet the little platform that the kebab end is going to sit on, because I can see that it's going to burn through quicker than the logs otherwise. This is of course an experiment, and remember, if you do get one of these and try this, it's at your own risk. So it's going to be something like this. I've sliced the chicken and folded it over on there, because as you'll remember, the chicken that was a whole piece struggled to actually cook in the reflector oven, and then obviously that'll sit there at the end and not go through. So after a little bit of additional jostling with the gloves on, I've managed to get it in place, but I'm going to have to wait till that dies down a little bit, because the chicken will be incinerated. I'm going in. That's about 3 seconds I can hold up there, which is sort of your barbecue temperature. We'll see how we go. You know what, after the addition of 2 or 3 bits of kindling in there and moving it around and turning it, I reckon we might have a win. And do you know what, I reckon that is a win. I'm just going to cut this open just to make sure. So there we have the pieces as they came off the kebab stick. Now the ones at the bottom here I thought would be done the most, and they are, but the ones at the top are still done and edible. It's obviously just a little bit carbonisation on these ones, so yeah, that's a win, even if it's not something that I'll probably do on a regular basis. And here we are in back garden mode. I've got a lentil dal on the go there, and if you look at the link that's just appeared, that'll tell you how to make that. It's absolutely delicious. And what I've got is the actual reflector oven. It props up on my fire pit just nicely, so I don't need any of the fixings at the back or any extensions. And I've got myself a little homemade naan, just cooking on the base there. Not quite a tandoor oven, but it's good heat in there. And what I'll do is transfer that to the bars if it starts to get a bit too hot. And when I went in to have the dal, it started raining, so I flipped it over and used it to keep the charcoal dry. So this is just a little off-the-cuff experiment. I'm going to see on a day when I'm expecting 40 degrees of heat whether solar power will cook an egg. Get some oil in that baking tin to just warm through. Right, we have hit 40. So this one's going in to see what happens. Well, I've got something bordering on a result, but it has been out here at least a good 2 hours, so useful experiment, but I sure as hell ain't eating it. I also did a control one to see if it was just the sun on its own, but it wasn't. You can see this has been less than successful. And finally, you can sort of cook bacon on there like this. You know, handy if you haven't got room initially on your embers, but it's not the best way to do it, but at least it started off. Excuse me while I scoff this. Now, hopefully that's been of some use to you, but I think my conclusion is this is a device for baking rather than cooking. Whilst it has its cooking ability, I think doing stuff like this crumble and bread and stuff like that's where it's at. Thinking of putting a size 4 hole in here ×2 to put an extra length of wire racking in to give more support to stuff like breads. And what I'm thinking of using is an old metal coat hanger, which isn't quite the same gauge as the wire, but it would do until I could hopefully find something of the same size. This is it, I'm committed to it now. As you can see, I've got a bit of wood backing up the interior of the oven, and I've centre punched 4 holes on each side, equally spaced obviously to get the shelf in. There's no going back now. Well, the holes aren't quite as neat and the size I thought they'd be, but I still reckon I've got a win. As you can see, I can fit this Crusader cup lengthways in there now, instead of having to just do it sideways. I'll probably just have to jiggle with the straightness of the middle bit that I've made, maybe put it in a fire and hammer it, but happy days.